What's going on, everybody? I'm Sam. I'm a student of the Bible. I've been a pastor for 22 years. You can read all my writings on samburke.org. My training involves biblical studies, theology, and biblical languages. We're going to jump back into James. We're in James chapter 5, and we're almost done with the book of James. We're going to read verses 1 all the way through 6. James is going to go back to a topic that he started talking about at the beginning of the book when he talked about rich people. There was something going on in that time frame where there was people who had a lot of money and were very wealthy, and yet there was a famine going on, and people were trying to find work, couldn't find work, and when they did find work, it seems that the people who had the wealth were not paying fairly, were not treating the poor well, and in fact were treating themselves well. And so this kind of sparks James to talk about this, and this is what he says in chapter 5. And so we're going to read verses 1 to 6. There's a couple things I want to pause and take a look at in the Greek, and then I want to kind of talk about some other parts of Scripture that we can kind of bring in to kind of supplement what he's talking about here, okay? So here it is, James chapter 5. It says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you." This is New American Standard 95, by the way. "Your riches have rotted, and your garments have become moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have rusted, and their rust will be a witness against you and will consume your flesh like fire. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure." Which kind of should make us think back to what Matthew wrote in his gospel that Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6 on the Sermon on the Mount, when he said, when he talked about storing up treasure on earth versus storing up treasure in heaven, right? Let's look that up real quick. Matthew chapter 6. And we're going to see right here, verse 19. "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And that is what James is drawing upon, is this sentiment. It's thought that the disciples had a book of sayings or scrolls of sayings of Jesus, and they would have been circulated throughout different churches, maybe copied down, and maybe that's where the whole idea of, if you are into textual criticism of the Gospels, then maybe Q came from, and Matthew draws from that, as well as from Mark and some other things. But this whole idea of these sayings, James is probably drawing on here too, that, one of Jesus' sayings was, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. Moth destroys it, rust destroys it, thieves break in and steal it." He says, "Your riches have rotten, your garments have become moth-eaten, your gold and your silver have rusted." I mean, this is like direct tie-in to Matthew chapter 6. And he's really poking at how these people are using their wealth and what their wealth really is all about. It's fleeting. It's going away. It's going to be, at the end of the day. And what are you going to have to show for all of your life when this stuff is eaten up, destroyed, and, burned up? Verse 4, he says this. He says, "Behold, pay the pay of the laborers who mowed your field, and which has been withheld by you, cries out against you. And the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth," is the word there. And it's a weird kind of word. We don't use it a lot, but the Greek there is the words Kurion Sabaoth, and it means the Lord of hosts. Okay, and so this term is used, I think, like somewhere around 250 times all the way through the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. Hebrew Bible, it's Yahweh Sabaoth, and it still means the same thing, Lord of hosts, or Jehovah Sabaoth is what they would say. This conveys, this idea of the Lord of hosts conveys that God is more powerful and is superior to any army, and he controls the hosts of heaven. So that is this Lord who the cries of those who you have mistreated, you who have wealth, and people came to you and they worked for you, and yet you mistreated them and you did not pay them a fair wage. You withheld wages from them. And he said all of those cries of those people who are suffering have reached the ears of the God who commands and is stronger than any army and commands the heavenly hosts. Then he says this, you have lived luxuriously on the earth and have led a life of wanton pleasure. And it's that word hedon, it's hedonism again. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and put to death the righteous man. He does not resist you. And so I want to talk briefly here, just really quickly, about who James is talking to and what he's talking about. This is not James condemning those who have money or those who have wealth. That's not what he's doing here. James is condemning those who use their wealth to oppress and to abuse people that are poor, that are needy, that are working for them. He's talking about people who are cheating people out of their fair wages, their fair earned wages that they've worked for, only to make their own wallets fatter. Okay, these are the people that James is talking to here. The people who neglect the needs of other people, of the poor, even though they have the means to help them. That's who James is talking about here. And he's saying, why have you done that? You have all this wealth, you have all this money, you have all these riches, and yet you are withholding it from people who deserve it because they worked for you, they earned a fair wage, and you're saying, no, I'm just going to make myself wealthy, and I'm not going to give someone what is fairly they've deserved, that I've hired them for. And also, there are people who are poor, who are in desperate need, and you won't even give to them, and yet you'll go live in your lap of luxury. That's what James is talking about here. And he's saying that goes directly against Jesus. It goes directly against what God has wants to set up in this world, and it's basically you becoming your own version of God and saying, I'm just going to take care of me and myself and and that's it. And it goes directly against Proverbs chapter 3. In Proverbs chapter 3, we find these words. It's verses 27 and 28. And it says this, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to do it. Do not say to your neighbor, go and come back, and tomorrow I will give it, when you have it with you. Do not devise harm, verse 29, against your neighbor while he lives securely beside you, is verse 29. So I think James is just trying to help us understand that it's not about having money. It's not about having wealth. That's not the problem. The problem is when we use that wealth in an abusive way. When we know we should do something good for somebody else and we choose not to make ourselves wealthier, to please ourselves. That is the problem. And James has been harping on that over and over and over again. It's this arrogance. It's this hedonism. It's this all about me, not about anybody else. Even when people come and you hire them to do a job and then you shortchange them and you don't pay them a fair wage. James is saying this is using your wealth to oppress somebody else and to abuse somebody else. And that is not what God calls us to do with it. And so he reprimands people who have means, who have wealth, and yet will not use it to help those who are in need, and will cheat people who work for them for a fair wage out of what they deserved and they earned so that they can keep more for themselves. That is what James is harping on and going after in this passage. So thanks for hanging out with me today. Hopefully this was a helpful way to look at James chapter 5, the beginning verses. Give me a like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you in the next video.